This episode of the House of Mystery is brought to you by Legacy Food Storage. The best way to protect your family is by being prepared. LegacyFoodStorage.com.
Crime and Forensics with Stephen David Lampley, your crime and forensic source from coast to coast.
Hi, I'm Mark Stalker. I was the original composer and sound designer for the hit show Forensic Files, and you're listening to Crime and Forensics with Stephen David Lampley.
You know you're lied to, right? It's not if you're lied to, it's do you know when it happens? Studies show that the average person can only catch a lie about 54% of the time. Heck, you might as well just flip a coin. But studies also show that a person who has been properly trained in lie detection can detect lies about 90% of the time. A big difference. Stephen presented his How to Catch a Liar session at the 2018 CrimeCon at the Gaylord Opryland Hotel and Convention Center, and had to be moved from the Washington Conference Room into the Presidential Ballroom due to the enormous number of registrations to hear his program. Even in the Presidential Ballroom, it was standing room only with 850 people seated. You can have this session brought to your company or organization. Go to StephenDavidLampley.com for more information.
Hello and welcome back to Crime and Forensics. I am your show host, Stephen David Lampley. We have a very special show for you today, the first part in a two-part series, and trust me, you don't want to miss either part of these shows. You may not know the name Raylene Linder, but you will certainly readily recognize the name of her aunt. You see, the names of Bonnie and Clyde are known the world over. We have on the show today Raylene Linder, niece of Bonnie Parker. We also are joined by our good friend and regular guest, Cheryl McCollum, who is the director of the world-famous Cold Case Investigative Research Institute and has worked with some of the top cold cases in history, including Tupac Shakur, Chandra Levy, Natalie Wood, and others. I want to take a moment and welcome both of you to the show. Let me start with Cheryl. Cheryl, you have gotten to know Raylene pretty well. And by the way, I am still sort of recovering from my self-agitation from not being able to attend the Valentine's Day party with you, Ray, buddy, and Nancy Grace and others. But you've come to know Ray. Take a moment, and if you would, tell us about her.
You cannot spend 5 minutes with her without just falling in love with her. She is everybody's grandma. Just sweet, kind, positive. It was really cute because she has a daughter named Lacey, and I have a niece named Lacey. And at the event for Valentine's Day, my niece was there, and Raylene goes right up to her, takes both her hands lovingly, and was like, I have my own Lacey, so I wanted to meet you. Just that kind of just personable and sweet. And I think she spoke to everybody in that room. And we had over 100 people. She was not in a hurry. She didn't rush anybody. She was just really taking her time to try to answer questions that people had past the presentation. Because really you can do an hour-long or 2-hour presentation, and all it does, Stephen, is give you more questions in your head. So, she took a lot of time with people and answered just as honestly and openly. And she does this remarkable thing, and Buddy does it too. And this, I think I admire about the two of them more than anything else. They are loyal to their family. they love their family, their whole family, their entire family. And they will be the first to tell you that they don't support or advocate the road that Bonnie and Clyde took, but they did take that road. And as that, family, they're going to love them and, do everything they can to make sure the story is told correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think you can ask more of them than that.
I have interviewed a couple of people, and I need to say this to our listeners, because I have been contacted previously from a couple of listeners. It's not been rampant by any means, but I have been contacted by a couple of listeners who expressed a little concern with me and regarding a past guest that I had on, that maybe I was glamorizing the acts of that particular family member. What I told them was that, look, people that are in the families are not part of all the other family members' lives. People in your family do things that you don't approve of. That does not make everybody else in the family part of what they don't agree with. You cannot live your life judging people based on the acts of other people. And I wanted to say that up front, that we are not glamorizing anything that Bonnie or Clyde did negatively, or any of their crimes, or any of their escapades that they did involving crime. Not at all. What we're here to do today is to provide sort of a behind the scenes look and facts as they come, not from movies, not from a magazine article, not from some book that somebody decided to write, but straight from the family, the facts of how it really was. All right, Cheryl, was that you wanting to address that?
Yeah, what you are doing, Stephen, is a living history of probably the most famous crime couple in history. It is imperative that we understand how two people from a loving, close, law-abiding, supporting family became these notorious outlaws. Because the reality is, I'm a criminologist, so I have to understand how can a street-walking hooker be a good mother? Because she can. How can a good preacher in the pulpit be amazing, but also a child molester? Because he can. I have to understand that crime. How does a law student become one of the most famous serial killers? Because it can happen. But you have to be able to understand crime from its very core. What Raylene and Buddy can tell you about the family is not only imperative, but we've got to pay attention, because the reality is, if it weren't for a few twists and turns here during the Great Depression, we would not have had Bonnie and Clyde.
That's true. Well, that's the whole purpose, is to get the facts out there, the living history, as you said, of what really took place, who Bonnie and Clyde really were. Not just from what we see on the media, but what they were as family, and what they were as uncles and aunts and brothers and sisters. So, Ray, if you would, tell us about your Aunt Bonnie. We, of course, like we said, we know what the movies and articles tell us, but if you will, from your perspective, who was Bonnie? What was her life like as a child and growing up before she met Clyde?
Well, Bonnie was my dad's sister. My dad was the oldest, and then Bonnie, and then Billie Jean. And my grandmother raised all three of them by herself, because her daddy died when Billie Jean was 2 years old. The kids were 2, 4, and 6, and my grandmother raised them by herself and worked, and they lived with like families did back then. My grandmother moved back to Dallas with the kids and moved in with her mother and daddy. And so they were all hardworking people. Bonnie was hardworking. Bonnie, I think, was probably the most vivacious because she was cute. She was tiny. She was outgoing. She had a big heart, and everything that I've heard from my Aunt Billie Jean and all was Bonnie rarely took home a full paycheck from her job because she worked at for one place was Marco's Cafe, and it didn't take long for the homeless people to find out that she was a soft touch, and so she would buy their dinners. She was chastised by her boss numerous times for spending her money on them, but she said she just couldn't stand to see someone do without food.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had a personality. My Aunt Billie Jean did too. Daddy must have missed the personality thing. Daddy was quiet and all, but Bonnie and Billie Jean had the outgoing personalities. And Bonnie was, I think, my grandmother, from all I saw in my time with them, was she spoiled them. They were all spoiled, and so they had a good life. They came from good, hardworking people, and just the fact that Bonnie would choose the route that she did was merely because she did love Clyde dearly. That's proven out through the years, and I myself, the family does not condone one thing that they did, but they were still their children, and they still loved them and tried to help them as best they could, and they went to all the meetings because they wanted to see them as much as they could for as long as they could, because they all knew what the outcome, what the ultimate end would be. So they had their meetings and such. And but Bonnie, I think, she was the dreamer from everything that I've read and heard from my aunt and all. That Bonnie was the dreamer, and she had talent and she had expectations of herself, and she loved the movies and anything that brought attention to herself. I think she liked doing there. So anyway, and it was so sad. She was talented in so many different ways, and then to choose the route that she chose for at 23 years old is just beyond me. I cannot fathom making a choice knowing that the only end was going to be the end of your life. But she made that choice herself, and Billie Jean has told me that through the different meetings that they would have, that even Clyde, but my grandmother and everybody would try to get Bonnie to stay home while she still could. And even Clyde tried to get her to, but she said no, that being with Clyde was her choice, and that without Clyde, life wouldn't be worth living anyway. So it was all entirely, her choice. And my grandmother, I read, said, sometimes you just don't understand your own children. And I'm sure my grandmother certainly didn't. And I don't understand the route, the path that they took. But they did, and they were still family, and there was still good in them. They just got into a point that there was no return, and they paid the ultimate price for it. It's the family, I know. And then my mother passed away when I was 4, so my Aunt Billie Jean raised me. We literally hid from it our whole lives. I still have friends that don't have a clue about any part of that in my life. It's I just never found it to be a topic of conversation. I've
Sure.
heard so much going on out, in different places that I've been, and bringing them up, and then I'd never say a word or anything, because we didn't talk, so I didn't know. Maybe they were telling the truth, but I would call my aunt, or I would call Blanche Barrow or Marie Barrow and say, did so-and-so happen? And it was usually always no, that it was just things that, was in the paper and in the magazines, and somebody dreamed up, and, or in their own way wanted to maybe be part of them. And the funny thing, this morning I was watching Walker, Texas Ranger, and they mentioned Bonnie and Clyde on the thing. So I guess 85 years later, and they're still a topic of conversation in all different areas. And I'm amazed at the amount of interest that is still for them and towards them. And I think maybe the main thing that people think about now is the love story, because one thing for sure and certain, it was a love story.
Of course it was.
And
they were very much in love, and that was obvious.
And that was proven, over and over. And after she got burned and all, Clyde carried her physically and all. And he came to Dallas and got my aunt, Billie Jean, and she went back and helped him take care of Bonnie there. And so he didn't abandon her or bring her in and abandon her at her mother's or anything. He stayed with her and took care of her. So and that was a pretty difficult situation, I'm quite sure.
Sure.
And I think the saddest thing is the fact that as young as they were, they had no pleasures. They had no they couldn't go dancing, and they couldn't go roller skating or anything. It had to be the loneliest life that I could ever imagine. Just the two of them and down up and down all these back dirt roads. It was not glamorous by any standards at all, the life that they lived. They were still loved by their family, and my birth name is actually Bonnie Ray Parker, and my mother's name was Edith Ray, so that's where the Ray came from. And that dealt me some misery, even though I didn't know why there. But anyway, in the 5th grade, my aunt Billie Jean changed my name from Bonnie Ray Parker to Raylene Frazier, which was her husband's name at that time. So through the years, we've never talked about it. I've never seen where it could be a topic of conversation. I mean, I've wondered how people, and there are so many people that claim to be kin to them, and I wonder, for one thing, why they were still outlaws, no matter what. They were still outlaws, and I've always wondered, why would people want to be kin to them? Because it wasn't easy for the family, for sure. But anyway, you never know about people, and even Bonnie and Clyde, you just don't know what affects people at times. So.
Well, now you mentioned a while ago, and I want to reiterate that some. You mentioned just a second ago that people do bad things. They still have good parts about them. And I heard a phrase not too long ago that says, the meanest person still has good, and the best person still has bad. We all have those parts. And yes, they did some obviously horrible things, but they were human beings. And like you said, they had family that loved them. Despite what it was that they did, they were still family. That was still their blood family.
Exactly. And there were reasons, they were children. They grew up there. They were loved through their life. They were not, mistreated or neglected in any sense of the word, and that was none of them, not the Barrows or the Parkers. I mean, the kids were were all well taken care of. The route that they took, like in Bonnie's case, circumstances was her feelings and her heart and all. And so she took the route of her heart, which was Clyde. And it's sad. It was such a waste of two young people who both were very talented, you know, and had such a life ahead of them. And the people that were in their lives were in my lives until they passed away in their 80s there. So, and they lived, my aunt and Blanche and Marie Bear all lived good, hardworking, productive lives, happy lives, you know, for the rest of their life after you know, the end of Bonnie and Clyde there, after they served their time in jail and, you know, for harboring and such, that they all lived very good, productive lives there that had nothing to do with any sort of evil, you know, and for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Cheryl, as a criminologist, what in your opinion makes someone go from a very happy family, raised properly, to do some of the things that Bonnie and Clyde did? Well, what are some of the precipitating factors that might cause that?
Well, I can tell you straight up, one of the biggest factors in the case of Bonnie and Clyde was the Great Depression. They were literally starving. And, you know, it's like I told my own children when I was telling them the story of Bonnie and Clyde. I said, you know, let dinner be an hour late and y'all's personality changes, you know? And so what if you didn't eat that whole night or the next day, or, you know, you didn't know what was going to happen the next month? Those are the sort of things that, you know, people get desperate. And, you know, Clyde, he you know, stole a car. You know, he did some, you know, petty things in the beginning. And, you know, he was following his older brother, Buck, to do it. And I think that when he went to prison, he was assaulted in prison. I think that very act changed him more than anything else. And when he came out, he vowed, I will never go back. And that is so critical, because when somebody makes a vow like that, based on something that horrific, they mean it, which means somebody should have seen coming down the road that if an officer gets too close, he'll kill him, because he's not going to go back. He's not going to let another man do that to him ever again. In the case of Bonnie, fell in love with that very person, because like Raylene said, that was her heart. That's where she was going, even though she knew what it might have meant. So I think being poor, being hungry, trying to struggle. Stephen Clyde tried to go straight more than once, and people just would not let him. And that's also, you know, something, you know, I think in society we need to talk about. And I'll just tell you one quick story. One of my grandmothers was born and raised in a little bitty town. And if she went to high school with somebody and she didn't think he was any count then, if I met the great-grandson 50 years later, she would say he ain't no good. Really? I mean, the daddy couldn't be good, the grandson couldn't be good, the great-grandson. She was not going to let that family outlive what she knew to be true of one person, and one person only. We're all guilty of that. We all just assume, oh, you know, here we have the president. Well, their children must be wonderful. Oh, here we have somebody that went to jail. Well, their kids are no good. That doesn't have to be true at all. In fact, the opposite could be true, because most of us that have lived long enough, we know the preacher's children are usually the wisest. So, you know, you just have to take people on faith. Some of y'all are laughing because you know I'm right. You know, but you want to take people at, you know, where they are, not what their lineage holds or even what one act could hold. But I think those are the main factors for me. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you. I agree with everything you said. People don't always choose their paths. Sometimes their paths are guided for them, and then it's beyond their control. I know as a parent, if my children were to ever go hungry, if that was to have ever happened, and they're adult now, but I would do what I've got to do to feed them. If I had to write a bad check, I would. Not saying I did, but I mean, if it had ever come to, I'm going to feed my children.
Absolutely.
I'm going to do what I've got to do to feed them. And is it right? No, it's not right, not at all. And I'm not by any means, in any way, condoning any of those actions. I'm
Of
speaking
course.
for myself as a
Yep.
parent that I'm going to feed my children. So, yeah, I think sometimes our situation dictates our actions uh, to a large degree. Uh,
Absolutely. And Stephen, I would like for Raylene to tell you about Blanche and Billie Jean fishing in their 80s and what happened to them.
Raylene, tell us about that.
Oh my gosh! There's these little two uh, 5 foot tall, gray haired ladies, and I'm telling you, they were a hoot, absolutely. And of course, throw Marie in there too. But they were just a hoot, and what one didn't think of, the other one did. And I'm not sure all of that stuff actually happened, but it was hilarious. And give them a couple of beers, and they could think of more. But they loved to fish, and I moved them to Cedar Creek where they could, where I lived down there then, and where they could fish for the rest of their lives. And they did, because those two gals would fish in a bucket of water, literally. And they were so funny. But Blanche had, her left eye was put out. And all, and so where I moved them both, they both had mobile homes in this addition at Cedar Creek, and and there was a pier right there where they could just walk out and fish off that pier, and all, and Blanche would, instead of like just throwing your line out, she would wind it up over her head and then throw it. And my aunt would say, she's going to kill us one of these days, because, and she knocked my uncle, or he was trying to dodge her line, and he fell off the pier one time. And Jean said, she's going to kill us one of these days. But they weren't down there 2 or 3 weeks, and they had their own little hidden away fishing spots that they discovered right, I think, before they got their homes decorated. They had already found them their fishing places. So they lived the few years of their life. They were happy. They fished when they wanted to, and they lived close together, about a block apart. And also they had a good, happy life there, doing what they enjoyed doing. But they were so witty that like I said, sometimes it was hard to believe for sure what they were saying, because they'd come up with something. And but they were just fun ladies, and like I said, they lived a good, productive life for the rest of their lives.
After you moved them down there, tell Stephen who paid them a visit.
Oh, well, I was there. We'd got them both moved down there, one a little earlier than the other one. And anyway, I was there visiting, and they were together. And one of them said, well, I got my phone call. And the other one laughed and said, well, I got mine a couple of weeks ago. And I said, what are y'all talking about? And they told me, said that the police calls them and lets them know within a very short period of time that they know where they're at. and these two little 80-year-old ladies, and I just got indignant. Oh my goodness, And my aunt told me, she said, Raylene, every place that you and I ever lived, she said, we'd be there about a week, and they'd let me know that they knew where we were,
Wow.
And I just thought, well, these two little 80-year-old ladies, and that was, how many years ago, there, and the police are still watching them.
Wow.
I just, that was kind of beyond, and I just got all indignant. But they said, well, that's just the way it is. Didn't bother them, but I just thought, well, that kind of stinks. But
Yeah.
as they say, it is what it is.
Well, it's part
But
of that. It's part of that judgment mentality where you judge everybody else on the actions of somebody, some individual.
right, exactly. And the thing down there, nobody knew who they were. In fact, nobody knew who anybody was. Down there the whole time that they were at Cedar Creek, nobody knew, who they were or anything. They're just two little old gray-haired ladies that would go grocery shopping in this little small store there, and I went with them one time, and that was enough for me. They went to get their baskets, and they go in opposite directions, and then they would holler across the store, "Hey, they got a sale on potatoes," or "They got a sale." And honestly, no lie, when they got up to the counter to check out, they would basically have the same things. Wow. Even though they went in opposite directions, there they would have the same things. And there was one story, I don't know if you have time for it or not, but
Yes.
They were at the green stamp place, Jean and Blanche, and like I said, these little tiny 5 foot tall, gray haired little old women, and they were at the green stamp store, and there was a lady in front of them that kept getting them to save her place in line, and she'd go change her mind. And then they finally got to the counter, and she plopped her purse up on the counter, and they said it just flopped wide open. And she turned around to him and asked him to save her place one more time. And anyway, one of them looked at the other one and said, "Boy, if she only knew who we were." I'm here, Bonnie Parker's sister and Bonnie Parker's running buddy, and there. But I guess you maybe would just have to see the picture of them, at that time and all, and they were so dry and witty there, and I could just see one turning to them, "Boy, if she only knew who we were." Just there. So they were neat gals, and so was Marie. Marie and I had a great relationship too, and but we never, actually in the family, going back, it was never discussed. I don't remember ever basically hearing anybody talk about it in the family, and my grandmother only lived 10 years after Bonnie died, so if it was discussed, of course I was a little gal there, if it was discussed, it was just not heard from. But I really don't think that it was. I think they lived it. It was a nightmare. It was over, and and they had to move on. And that's the way I think about it. I think the way that they reacted, because they didn't want. My grandmother and them couldn't hide from it. My daddy couldn't hide from it, and all. But back at that time, and so they had to deal with whatever came at them there. But it was not. They didn't go up and introduce themselves as, "Hello, I'm kin to Bonnie Parker," or something like that. And the people, I can assure you, and there are people out there that claim to be kin to them, but they're not. I'm the last direct living descendant of Bonnie Parker, and I have 2 children. And but the only thing that interests them in this, of course, they're adults now. The only thing that interests them is anything that concerns me there. But when I'm gone, and I'm 84, so I'm over the hill. But when I'm gone, well, then that will be the end of anything of Bonnie. And same thing with Buddy too. He has children, but it's just they just they don't have, my kids don't have the interest in it unless it affects me in some
Right.
way.
Let me ask you this question, and I'm sure our listeners want to know, because I myself saw the film. Back in 1967, there was a film release that I'm sure you're all too familiar with, Bonnie and
Yeah.
Clyde, and it was released in 1968. And like I said, I went to see it myself as a 9-year-old child, and of course, I also had the Georgie Fame 45 single that I played incessantly. Uh, but how accurate was that film, Raylene?
Well, I think, my aunt and they all fought it desperately, and my aunt was just very outspoken about it and all. And she said there's no way that they would go into a bank and introduce themselves as the Barra Gang or something. They didn't call each other by their names. They all had nicknames, Bud and Sis and names like that. They didn't. And but the Buddy can tell you there was, I think he said there's only like 3 things that were actually close to being right. But Buddy knows the events, the places and the times that, things happened. And I don't know that there. But I know my aunt was, oh my gosh, I mean, it was, they thought it like, tooth and nail, but they did not know that they needed to renew the copyright on my grandmother and Clyde's sister's book, Fugitives. And so that's how it got loose. But they said, and that it was not. I saw it one time back. I had a cousin that wanted to go see it because I would have never gone to see it. I don't read the books. I don't watch the documentaries. But anyway, I saw it then, and that one time, and it was just I don't know. It could have been a shoot 'em up, a B movie or something there as far as I was concerned with it. But it's I know they were very adamant about it, and about how they were depicted and all there, that it was a long way from the truth. But then I think there's been some made since that is even further away from the truth there. But I think the one thing though was the actual, that it romanticized Bonnie and Clyde, their feelings for each other. That's the only thing I can think of that maybe was redeeming, in it, or that had any redeeming qualities. But there's a couple of other things, and I've heard Buddy mention them, but I don't remember what they were there. But anyway, my daughter went to, there's a festival every year where they were killed in Gibbsland, Louisiana, and they have a festival every year, and I've gone for many years now. And anyway, the first time my daughter and I went, she came home and she rented the movie, and she watched about half of it. She said, "That's the stupidest thing I ever saw." And so that's been our extent of of any of the movies and things. Is it was that introduction, and I couldn't even tell you now what the movie, basically what it was, what all it involved, But I think that the one thing that has really hit me more than anything is the loneliness that those 2 young people had to. It had to be totally, so lonely. I think that's the thing that has maybe hurt my heart more than anything for them is the fact of how lonely that life had to have been,
Yeah.
And there. But anyway, I told Cheryl that I can assure everybody that the that being willing to die for your man does not run in the family. There, that is a true fact.
Oh,
But anyway, the things was that Clyde, had his problems starting out, and Bonnie, she married at 16, and it now something is funny because my Aunt Billie Jean married, I think, at 14 or 15, and she had her two babies who passed away 4 days apart. They were 2 and 4. And Bonnie married Roy Thornton at 16, and I got married at 17. So so evidently that part maybe did run in the family, However, Jean didn't stay with Fred, but and I didn't stay with mine there. So part of it did run in the family, and part of it didn't, I guess.
Now, I read somewhere, or maybe somebody told me, that there's some interest in moving Bonnie next to Clyde.
Yes, and I think I've been hit with the your grandmother said, well, I can certainly understand my grandmother's feelings back at that time and all, but my grandmother wasn't thinking 85 years later, and the interest that is still in the two of them, it is amazing. I am just floored by the interest that is still, in them. And to me, I think they made it known at the time. Her poems made it known. They expected to be buried side by side, to still be together. And I think because I'm the last one that can do this, I think, and the more I thought about it, I was approached about it, and the more thought that I put into it, and talked to a few friends of mine that do know who I am. Trust me, lots of people still don't know, and no big deal, but it's just not anything we ever talked about. But I still think that that's the right thing to do for this day and time. And there's people that visit Clyde's grave. I've been out there, and I've had people come up and and to see his grave, and then they're on their way to Bonnie's, or they came from Bonnie's, to see Clyde. And Buddy dug up a tree out there. It took him quite a long time, and he said he was amazed at the people that came up, to see the grave. And you can go in the cemetery, and it's an old, kind of unkept cemetery, but it is a historical cemetery. And the path from the gate is directly worn out right to Clyde and Buck's grave. And there is a place that they had left for Bonnie next to Clyde. So we're hoping, there's a lot to it, to the, to getting this all done. There is a lot to it, but I think it's the right thing to do. And I think if my grandmother is unhappy with me, I think we will have a come to Jesus talk when we meet again. I'm not sure to be one, but I just think personally, and this is the thing to do for them. And we want to get like a companion headstone, and have it together again. Have part of her poem, that's saying that they would be buried side by side, engraved on it. And I think it's a good thing. I really do. I think it's a good thing, and for this day and time, and the interest that is still there. So obviously, 85 years, and the interest, they're still talking about Bonnie and Clyde on Walker, Texas Ranger.
Absolutely.
Where, it's just amazing. So I'm all, there's just a lot involved in it there, but hopefully we can manage it.
Sounds good. All right, we are about out of time. I would also like to ask you to come back at another time if you would, and let's talk more about yourself and Bonnie, your aunt.
I'm not as exciting as Bonnie, so talking about her is more interesting to your program.
Well, I would love to have you back sometime if you could spare the time.
Great.
Raylene, do you speak to groups? Is that something that you do? Go out and talk about?
Well, we have quite a few over the last few years here. I'd say 3 or 4 years or so. And we've been invited, and it was like Cheryl. We went to Germany. We went all the way to Germany in October.
Oh.
We were invited there. And then Cheryl invited us to Atlanta. That was a great trip. Germany, not so much. Atlanta was great. It was a great trip there. And but we have it here in Dallas. I'm amazed at the different groups here. I guess it's a few months ago now, but we went to Allen, Texas, to the auditorium. It was a good sized auditorium, and it was packed. And it was only Buddy and I, and it was Buddy and Charles Hurd. Charles is the extra. He's the historian. He's the extra person in our group here, So anyway, Buddy did an excellent. What would you say, Cheryl? Of Bonnie's poem, of breaking down Bonnie's poem, each stanza of it. He did. They showed it on the screen. Yeah, and they showed it on the screen there, and so we were just amazed because the place was packed. It was just strictly for Bonnie and Clyde, and the people had interesting stories that their grandmothers and grandpas had told them. And I've really thought to myself, if Bonnie and Clyde ate as much fried chicken and mashed potatoes as everybody said their grandmas fed them, I don't know how they got it back. But I don't say anything. That's great, and all, that's just my personal thought there that runs through my mind when they're telling me. But anyway, we've, and we did one for BBC, and I don't know, there's been several that we've done, and basically it's kind of off the top of our head, Buddy knows the times and places and events and all of that, and I just basically know, about my family and Blanche and Marie and my part, because they were in my life, up until they passed away. So I know them up close and personal, and they were a hoot. I am blessed to have known them because you have some fun people in your life. Well, those 3 gals were.
Yeah. Well, it has been a pleasure, Raylene, having you on and learning the facts of what really happened. And again, like I said, I'd like to have you on again, and let's continue this conversation. Cheryl, listen, I want to thank you for being on here as well. And if someone wants to contact you at the Cold Case Investigative Research Institute, how do they go about doing that?
They can contact us on Facebook. We have a couple of pages, or they can contact us through our website, which is coldcasecrimes.org. You don't have to thank me. I would love to talk to the two of y'all every day.
Hopefully we can do this again. And of course, now on part 2, for those who are listening in, and I hope everybody is, part 2, we're going to have Buddy Barrow, like I said, on the part 2 of this series, who is Clyde Barrow's nephew. So you're going to want to hear that as well. Listen, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate both of you joining me, and hopefully talk to both of you again soon. This is Stephen David Lampley, and you're listening to Crime and Forensics, your #1 source for true crime radio.
This is a national emergency. Important details will follow.
Are you prepared? Legacy Food Storage, The best way to protect your family is by being prepared. Go now to LegacyFoodStorage.com. Use coupon code HOM15 now for 15% off. Quick, go!
Starbucks Via Instant is made with the same 100% Arabica beans served at Starbucks. So it's the only instant with the rich, delicious taste of the Starbucks coffees you love and takes only seconds to make. Starbucks Via Instant, the only instant coffee of its kind. Available in black, flavored lattes and iced coffee.
You've been listening to Crime and Forensics with Stephen David Lampley, your crime and forensic source from coast to coast.
Music by JasonLampley.com.